What's up, guys? It's Toad. Very late night here. Just before I go out and fly to Florida tomorrow for Bohemian Grove, I'm getting the college football and NFL weekly videos done now because screw it, why not? Hopefully, I don't go too long on these. Very late night, massively degenerate hours. The NBA is still on right now, I think, or no, just ended. I think Phoenix Clippers went into overtime. I don't even know who wound up winning the game. I think the Clippers did cover, though. I talked about that as a lean on my show today. Haven't gotten involved in the NBA yet. But I will probably have a morning show where I'll talk about whatever's going on Thursday, including some of these college football games. But I have 3 college football games that are on Saturday, and I'll talk about a couple of plays that just missed, which actually I'll start with one of those just because it's earlier. It's on Friday. So I may talk about it again if I do like a morning show on Friday from Florida, which maybe I will. But Louisville, Boston College, I'm just going to point out quickly because I was close to making a play on BC in this one. I think it's a bad spot for Louisville and potentially a sandwich spot, but the market looks very much against it with Louisville up from 6.5 to 7.5 with juice. BC somehow getting a lot of public action, 86% of tickets, 76% of the cash. I don't really understand why the public would be coming in that heavily on the BC side. I don't fully get it because Louisville has been the team that looks way better this season, and Louisville's recent losses are all losses that don't look bad against Notre Dame, SMU, and Miami. I mean, those losses all look good. They beat Virginia, who beat BC, so the public action here doesn't make sense. And if I see this market like turn around, maybe I'll actually wind up firing on BC, but maybe I'll talk about that Friday morning if that does happen. But for now, I'm not doing it, but just figured I would point it out. This looks like a sandwich spot for Louisville, man. They just came off a very high scoring, just total barn burner against Miami. Louisville was in this game. It was tied in the fourth quarter. It was tied multiple different times. And then they wound up falling behind, and the game was over with like a few minutes left in the game, really. Once they fell behind by multiple scores, then it was pretty much over, and they did kind of get a garbage time score here to cut it back to 7, but still, that's the type of game that I think can linger, and because it's their third loss, if they had any like hopes of potentially trying to get into the playoffs or anything like that, I think that might be out of the picture now. I think those hopes might be dashed, so that third loss might be like a total dream crusher, and now they have to go up to Boston to play Boston College. I mean, this doesn't look like a spot where Louisville would really like have total focus here. It's going to be 49 degrees and rainy in Boston too. It's just cool and rainy all the time now. Actually, the last couple of days it's been like in the 70s, 60s and 70s in Boston, but still doesn't look like a spot where Louisville's going to really want to go up there and play in weather like that. And they have Clemson up next, who's a top 10 ranked team now again in the country. So it does look like a sandwich spot, a spot where they could overlook BC. And BC, on the other hand, BC, I believe they're coming off a bye, if I'm not mistaken. No, they're not, but they have extra time off. They played last Thursday, so they have 2 extra days off because Louisville played on Saturday against Miami. BC's been off since Thursday, and BC is on a 2-game loss streak, so that extra time off maybe will help them refocus a little bit. I mean, they lost these 2 games on the road. BC actually still has not lost at home, although they faced some pretty weak teams at home so far, but still, they are undefeated at home. They lost both these games on the road, and they're coming off what is a pretty ugly loss by 21 against Virginia Tech, who is the better team and was the better team, but does look more like a bounce back spot to me for BC, who they didn't have those higher aspirations to start the season that Louisville did, because Louisville was a pretty highly ranked team to start the season and certainly in the picture to win the ACC, which seems like it's kind of out of the picture now. So I like Boston College in that one. I'm not playing it because the market is just indicating completely against it. I just don't really understand why. What's up, Charles? Yeah, late night. AOC's alma mater, I know. It wasn't BC, it was BU. She went to BU, dude. She had the video where her titties are looking pretty nice. She's dancing around. She went to BU, which is the alma mater of a lot of my relatives, by the way. Not to be confused with BC, but I'm pretty sure she went to BU. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Boston Market, yeah. She's like a rotisserie chicken, juicy, and you can eat her up. I'll probably talk about a couple of these other games maybe on Friday if I'm doing videos like from my phone while I'm in Florida. But just for time's sake tonight, I'm going to talk about some of these other biggest games here. Some of the games between the ranked teams at the very least. Notre Dame and Navy, 12 versus 24. Who would think Navy and Army are both ranked in the top 25 now? But Notre Dame, I mean, even though they're a one-loss team and Navy is undefeated, Notre Dame obviously is the better of these two teams here. This is a weird neutral site game, which I believe is at MetLife Stadium in East Rutherford. So it's where the Jets and Giants play. So it is closer to where Navy is, I suppose, because they're on the East Coast, Notre Dame, Midwest, but I don't think that matters that much. I mean, basically, it's a neutral site game. Notre Dame, I mean, they had that one weird slip up where they lost to Northern Illinois, and other than that, they really haven't done much of anything wrong, and they just continue to play well. They are coming off a pretty big game, though, against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech has been pretty good, but remember, Georgia Tech was without their really good quarterback in that game, King, so maybe there's a little bit less to take away from that game from Notre Dame's side there, but it was also in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So it was still a game, NFL Stadium game. You're going to step up a little bit for that. But Notre Dame, then again, they don't have anything on deck after this. Navy is undefeated and ranked, so Navy will probably still draw Notre Dame's focus in this one. Navy is going to want to win this game as well. Navy is they're doing something different this year, man. They're running the wing T offense that whoever this offensive coordinator they brought in is running, which is like some weird mix of triple option and like spread offense and somehow kind of combining the two. It involves throwing the ball more, but also still running option plays and running the ball a lot. Still, very strange offense, and it's been working so far. And I think that coordinator was doing it at like the high school level, and he's brought it to Navy, and it's working. But Navy, I mean, this is going to be the best opponent they've faced so far. I mean, they've faced a pretty weak schedule. Notre Dame has obviously faced a much more difficult schedule, so I expect that Navy is probably going to have their undefeated run end here. Notre Dame's a 13-point favorite, and they're up to 13 with juice. Navy getting the public action, 70% of the tickets and 63% of the cash. So I think the public's coming in and thinking, how am I getting all these points with Navy? Basically, as an undefeated team against a one-loss Notre Dame team. Well, again, as I like to say, the odds makers are telling you what you need to know here. They're telling you Notre Dame is a significantly better team, almost 2 touchdowns better on a neutral field. And Notre Dame has played the way more difficult schedule, so I expect Notre Dame to be able to win that game. I lean to the Notre Dame side in that one, even though maybe they're coming off a somewhat bigger game. But like I said, I mean, I don't think Navy's going to be a team they're going to overlook when they're ranked and undefeated. Juicy juice. Yeah, that's right. The juice is loose. What else am I talking about here as far as the rest of these games go? Actually, this is a better look at it, right? Because I can kind of see the ranked matchups a little bit more easily. Illinois, Oregon. Oregon is up to the number 1 ranked team. I will tell you right now, they're not actually the best team in college football. They're good, but they're not the best team. They're top 10 I would say, somewhere in that range. But I don't know if they cracked the top 5, to be honest. If you look at the most like respected sets of power ratings, they have a good offense. Their defense, a little bit vulnerable. Oregon, I thought they were in a bad spot to some extent coming off that game against Ohio State. That was a big win against Ohio State. But remember, it was a weird spot for Ohio State having to go out to the Pacific Coast. Not something that they're used to doing. And I did lean to Oregon in that one. Oregon was able to get the win. And then I think they got it a little bit easy against Purdue because Purdue was coming off a game where Purdue almost upset Illinois. So neither of those teams are in a good spot. But Purdue, their offense, after that quarterback change, that Purdue offense could not do anything. But that Purdue team is just so bad that I don't really know if I'm going to take that much away from that win. So Oregon's best wins are Boise State and Ohio State, obviously. Those are the 2 best wins by far. Michigan State, not totally unimpressive either. They play good defense at the very least. Oregon is the better team here. I mean, they're a big favorite at home, obviously. And it is going to be a weird spot for Illinois having to go out to the Pacific Coast again. Like I just said with Ohio State, these Big Ten teams in this new Big Ten. They're not used to having to go out to the Pacific Coast. And I think Oregon actually does have extra rest slightly as well because they played on a Friday, whereas Illinois played on a Saturday. And Illinois is coming off beating Michigan last Saturday in a top 25 ranked matchup where they knocked Michigan out of the top 25. So kind of a big win for Illinois, bigger than Oregon's. And Oregon, all of this being said, I kind of lean to the Oregon side in this one for all these reasons, just because I think it's a weird spot for Illinois to have to go out there and play in the Pacific time zone, which they haven't done this year. Their road games have been Nebraska, which at least took them to the Midwest, and they kind of got away with one in that one, pulling off an upset, overtime, and then they played at Penn State, which is obviously not easy to do. But this is the furthest west that they're going to be going, and it's Eugene, Oregon. They're not used to going out there, and they are coming off beating the returning champs, man, Michigan, who were ranked at the time. That's not nothing. I mean, that is a big win. So having to play a couple of step-up games in a row. So I think the lean slightly would be to Oregon in this one, even though I do think Oregon probably is going to be a bit overvalued because I don't think they should be ranked number one. Let's see here. Oregon, what do we got? I'm also questioning how good Illinois really is, to be honest, after Illinois almost lost to Purdue and Illinois, that game against Kansas. I mean, Kansas is nowhere near as good as what they were ranked at the start of the season, so some of their wins don't look as good. The market does look to be indicating on Illinois a little bit. Oregon's down from 21.5 to 21, 67% of tickets and 82% of the cash on Illinois. So Illinois looks like they are a bit public, but getting some of the cash going in their direction as well. Like I said, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. Oregon seems to be in the somewhat better spot to me. You like Notre Dame, Charles? Yeah, I mean, I think they're undoubtedly the better team there, but we'll see what happens because Notre Dame, I mean, I do think they're used to facing the triple option too because I think they do face Navy most years, if I remember correctly. I think they play in Ireland against Navy fairly often. That tends to be the case. So they're not totally unfamiliar with facing triple option attacks, but Navy is doing that wing T thing where they're also throwing spread into the mix. When I mean, a lot of teams run spread. So BYU, UCF, I'll comment on just because this was an interesting handicap to me because my first reaction was, whoa, BYU hasn't played on the road kind of for a while, and these road games, they kind of stayed out like in the Mountain Time Zone and Central Time Zone, SMU, Wyoming. When they played at SMU, Jennings had just kind of taken the reins at SMU, so their offense hadn't really started clicking yet. So even though it's still an impressive double-digit upset, I don't know if it's as impressive as if they'd beaten the current form SMU. Beating Wyoming, not impressive. Wyoming sucks. And beating Baylor, I mean, it was a difficult spot for BYU to be, and I actually lost on Baylor in that one. Baylor, I'll talk about Baylor in a little bit, and Baylor I think might not be as bad as we think they are. But BYU, I mean, I'm not necessarily, I'm saying that I don't know that these road wins are really all that impressive. And going out to the East time zone, to the East Coast, to a place where they don't usually play at UCF, seems a little bit difficult to me. And with Utah next, so the Utah's been kind of falling apart and now doesn't have Cam Rising, but Utah still, I mean, I think they're still kind of considered to be one of the better teams in the Big 12, and UCF is just kind of sitting here, and it's like, are they really going to pay attention to a UCF team that has one win in conference and is below 500? I don't know, because UCF, I think, has lost a couple of games where they're favorites, so they've been upset a couple of times, and they're probably a little bit better than their record looks. UCF can definitely run the ball. So this looked like a tough spot for me, for BYU. And they are coming off that crazy game against Oklahoma State last week that went like late. It went right to the wire, basically. BYU had to win right at the end with that late touchdown there. But on the other hand, BYU kind of escaped in that game because they were a big favorite in that game of 7.5. So maybe that is actually a type of game where it's a close call and they might actually be focused coming off of that because they almost lost to an Oklahoma State team who's not as good as we thought they were. But I could see that going both ways. Like I said, they could also maybe consider beating Oklahoma State to be a big win because Oklahoma State is like a staple of the Big 12 conference. So BYU being a newer team to the Big 12, that game probably does actually mean something. So this is definitely a tough handicap. So that kind of swings me back around to actually leaning to UCF slightly in this one because the situation. But UCF, they're coming off a tough game against Iowa State where they were probably a double-digit underdog. Iowa State's good. Yeah, 13.5. And this game went right to the wire. I think UCF was actually winning the game. Look at that. Percentage-wise, UCF was basically about to win the game at the end there, even though Iowa State did dominate this game statistically with over 100 more yards and double the amount of first downs. But UCF had the lead by 8 in the fourth quarter and then gave up 2 straight scores, including a touchdown in the final 30 seconds of the game. They lost as a big underdog to Iowa State. So UCF is also in a spot that doesn't look that good. So one way to look at it is that BYU's coming off an escape and UCF is coming off nearly pulling off a giant upset. But then I think the travel spot is still bad for BYU. I still think that was kind of a big effort game against Oklahoma State. So then that all kind of balances out. And then it kind of swings me back to the UCF side, except I can't play UCF because they are off of that like really big effort game like that. But it is still a weird spot for BYU. So the weird spot in the the weird travel spot and the market, I think, are kind of the clincher in this one, where Central Florida does look like it would be the lean. They've flipped from a 2-point dog to a 2-point favorite. It looks like it's headed through the 2. BYU is, of course, public, because the public's going to come in and be like, wait a minute, BYU is ranked 11. They're undefeated, and they're getting points against a team that's below 500, Central Florida. What is happening here? So public coming in 68% of the tickets on BYU, but 60% of the cash on Central Florida. So it does look like basically a trap line here. Like UCF, below 500 team, how are they laying points against number 11 ranked undefeated BYU? So that is the other question that you have to ask. Like, the books are not giving away money here, and they are telling you that even though BYU is the better team, because UCF isn't quite getting home field here, BYU is not significantly better than UCF is. So it's an interesting one. It's one of those lines where it just looks way too easy to take BYU. It almost looks too obvious that BYU is the better team. You're getting them as the underdog. Urjo, what is up? Which sport is my favorite to watch or to bet? I mean, it used to be baseball when I was a kid because it was like very discreet. I just like the statistical aspects of it, but now it's probably college basketball, I think, is my favorite. And to bet, I probably would also say college basketball, just because I just enjoy the sport. It's not my best betting sport, though. The NBA is, but I don't enjoy the NBA as much. But I do do a fair amount of winning at NBA. It is my best betting sport. Yeah, sorry, Nate. I'm going to be in Florida, so I figured if I'm going to be at my computer setup here for these bigger weekly videos, I'm just going to do it before I leave. Oh, thank you, Charles. Yeah, you get a gift from me when you least expect it. What's up, Carl? I'm going to get to my play. I only have 3 plays at least, so this is going to be a little bit quicker. And I'm not talking about that many of these games. I am talking about Missouri, Alabama. I mean, this is one of the bigger games here. A game between 2 ranked teams, obviously. 21 Missouri and 15 Alabama. And both of these teams have been dropping down the rankings, man. It's gotten to a point where maybe these teams are a little bit underranked, and I think especially in the case of Alabama. I don't think Alabama is as low as the 15th best team, man. I think Alabama is still probably a top several team in the country. Missouri, what they've done, I think, is far less impressive. I mean, they have not faced that difficult a schedule. When they beat BC, BC was ranked, but BC was overranked. And BC came within 6 of them at Missouri, even though Missouri, I think, was up 13 or 14 close to the end there. Missouri beating Vandy barely. I mean, looks a little bit more impressive now that Vandy has pulled off some big wins. But Vandy, I still think that they've caught some good teams at opportune times, and I don't think Vandy is anywhere near as good as what their ranking indicates either. So I don't know what to think about that. And then the best team Missouri faced, the one like actual good team that they faced, Texas A&M, they got absolutely trounced at Texas A&M. I thought that game was going to be closer than it was. I mean, that was just a total blowout. And then Missouri did face Auburn, which isn't that easy, really. Auburn's not that bad, but that was last week. I thought it was maybe a look ahead to this Alabama spot here. Missouri, they almost lost that game. I mean, Auburn had the lead for almost the entire game. Missouri kind of just pulled that game out of their ass right at the end. So that doesn't really look that great either for Missouri. So I kind of like the Alabama side in this one. Alabama being a 2-loss team, it's not over for Alabama. I mean, this Alabama team, obviously they have championship aspirations. They're Alabama, even though they don't have Nick Saban anymore. They got Kalen DeBoer there. I got his first name right this time. I mean, he's a coach that coached Washington to the championship game last year. So these guys expect to be there. And with 2 losses, they're not done yet because of the expanded playoff. So they're coming off a loss to Tennessee. So both of these teams are coming off lackluster performances. I mean, Alabama's been lackluster for a few weeks in a row here, but I think that Georgia win was just so big that they were in a letdown spot after that, and they didn't pay attention to Vandy, lost that game. I don't know how to explain the South Carolina game as much, really. And then Tennessee, I mean, that's a difficult game. I thought Alabama would be in a spot where they were refocused there, but still, it's not easy to go into Tennessee and beat them. I mean, that Tennessee team is pretty good. So, I mean, that loss is excusable at the very least. Playing poorly against South Carolina is kind of the weird outlier in there where that was more difficult to explain, but maybe even that was like a look ahead to Tennessee. So, I don't know. But I think Alabama, I think they're a little bit better than they look now. I think their ranking, the fact that their ranking has fallen so much, I think is an overreaction, whereas Missouri, I don't know if it is really an overreaction. I think Missouri just started the season ranked higher than they should be. I mean, this is Alabama we're talking about. They, at the very least, they have the pedigree. They do have some guys who were there last year. They're still experienced, so I like Alabama in this spot. And the fact that they have 2 losses, I think, is actually going to keep them focused. So I think they're not going to actually be in like any sort of sandwich type of spot here, coming off a big game against Tennessee and with LSU up next. I think they can't afford to overlook anybody now, man, because if they take a 3rd loss, then I think they're done. But because of the expanded playoff with 2 losses, they could still get in, man, and they still are not out of it in the SEC either. I mean, the SEC has no undefeated they have 2 undefeated teams in conference. What am I saying? But it's not over for Alabama yet. So they still have chances to make the playoffs, and probably because the SEC is so good, you're probably going to see numerous SEC teams are going to be able to make the playoffs out of this field. Like even maybe a couple of teams that don't make the SEC championship may make that 12-team playoff just because the SEC is that formidable. So I do like Alabama in this one just because I think they're the better team. And if you get both teams showing up to play here, I think the better team is going to win out. And Alabama, I mean, you can see they're favored by quite a bit here. Up from 14.5 to 17, although with reduced juice. So really, it's like 16.5. But that line has moved up, man. 68% of the tickets and 88% of the cash on Alabama. So they are actually a little bit public, but it does look like they're getting the money coming in on their side as well. Not a play for me, obviously, but I lean to the Alabama side in that one. I think this ranking disparity is actually kind of misleading. As you can see, the odds makers, again, are telling you something, man. Alabama's a 2-touchdown favorite, even though the rankings disparity here is only 15 versus 21, which makes it look like a close game. Looks like it should be a close game, but the odds makers are telling you Alabama is a 2-touchdown favorite, more than a 2-touchdown favorite. 2 touchdowns and a field goal at home. So that is what's going on there. Catching, what's up, man? No, I'm doing this and I'm doing NFL after this probably. I'm going to get this done fairly quickly because I don't have there aren't that many other ranked games or games that are really that worth talking about. Let me see here. What else we got? I'm just making sure I didn't miss any of these games. Yeah, we'll do Texas Vandy. I mean, I think this is, it's this one and then LSU A&M, and then I'll get to the actual plays, I guess. Texas and Vandy, I mean, this is, again, like I said, I think Vandy, the fact that they've gotten into the top 25 because of beating a couple of good teams in opportune spots, I think they're overranked, man. I mean, I'm looking at the power ratings, the sets of power ratings that I use, they're like barely in the top 70, basically, but they're ranked top 25. I mean, maybe they're better than we think they are still, but still, I mean, even if that's the case, what are we saying? That Vandy maybe is like top 50, somewhere around there, maybe at best, like if you really give them the benefit of the doubt there. I mean, Vandy, what have they done? I mean, yeah, they stepped it up against the two best teams that they faced, Missouri, which Missouri, I don't know, man. I think Missouri, maybe they're just not as good as they appear, and I think Missouri was probably looking ahead to bigger SEC games and just took Vandy lightly because Vandy's been so bad recently, and Vandy almost caught them. That one. Then Vandy, like I said, they caught Alabama off of beating Georgia. I mean, there's no bigger letdown spot than whichever team wins Alabama, Georgia, right? So even though Vandy was coming off a near miss against Missouri, which normally would be a pretty bad spot as well, Vandy did have a bye in there that kind of helped them out. So you can kind of explain this Alabama game because of the spot. I mean, it was a much bigger letdown spot for Alabama there. Alabama just having beaten Georgia. I mean, that's the ultimate letdown, basically. Then Vandy caught Kentucky. I think Kentucky was coming out of a bye there, but Kentucky had upset Ole Miss before that, even though Vandy was not in a position anymore where they were going to be overlooked because they had upset Alabama. But so I don't know. Kentucky, I just don't think they used that bye very well to their advantage. But then we saw Vandy take a little bit of a step back. I played Ball State last week, and Vandy was like a 27.5-point favorite in this game, and they only scored 24 points. So they didn't even score enough points to even cover the spread, even if they had shut Ball State out. So they took a step back there. It was a bad spot for them, though. I mean, I think they just completely overlooked Ball State because what are you going to do when you're playing all these SEC teams and you have a MAC team coming into your place? You're not going to be fully focused. So I got that one right. But now I think this is where we maybe we see Vandy take a little bit of a step back just because, I mean, they're facing another team, even though I know that was the case with Alabama and with Missouri. Those two teams are better than Vandy. Alabama is so significantly better that they were like a 20-whatever point favorite on the road against Vandy, and they would still probably be around a 20-point favorite, maybe a little bit less than that. We're looking at Texas being almost a 20-point favorite here, though, at Vandy. So that's the thing. I like looking at this, even though Texas is ranked 5, yeah, and they took a loss last week to Georgia. They took their first loss, which I'll mention that in a minute because that might make it another bad spot for a Vandy opponent. That's the only thing that I think Vandy has going for them this week is that Vandy is coming off a lackluster game against Ball State, so they might be focused here at Texas coming into their house, whereas Texas is coming off a huge game against Georgia where they took their first loss. So it is actually a worse spot for Texas here. So Vandy, yet again, is actually catching a team in a bad spot, but still, you're looking at two top 25 ranked teams now. Vandy, a 2-loss team, and Texas, a 1-loss team. So I think to the public eye, it's going to look a little bit closer than it actually is. And then the odds makers are telling you, well, no, Texas is still way better than Vandy, but although they're down from 19 to 18.5 with juice. Vandy only has 51% of the tickets. I actually thought it was going to be more than that. And they do have 68% of the cash. I mean, if you forced me to lean in this game, I would actually still lean to Vandy, despite what I just said, because as I'm saying, and the odds makers are telling you right there, Texas is actually basically 3 touchdowns better than Vandy, because you're getting like Vandy getting some home field mixed in there. But Texas in this spot, I'm not sure that I love it. Coming off taking their first loss, and a lot of times, man, if you become the number 1 ranked team and then you take your first loss against one of the other top teams, that's a big game. That can tend to hang you over, even though Texas played very poorly in that game. So arguably it could be a spot where they're going to want to bounce back here, but I just don't know about that. I think it is a tough spot for Texas because that's the type of loss that can hang you over into the next week. And the other difficulty here is that Texas has played almost no road games this year, man. They've only played one other true road game, and it was against Michigan, which still, I mean, that's difficult. It's at the Big House, but that was when Michigan was still trying to figure out what they were going to do on offense. They hadn't switched to Orgy yet, so maybe there's a little bit less to take away from that. And Texas really has not faced that difficult a schedule. I mean, for a team that was ranked number 1, the schedule was pretty weak, man. So, take off. I mean, see what you can take away from all of that, I guess. Those are my feelings on that game there. Have Mark Random guests on the show. I'm going to be seeing him tomorrow, I believe. I'll meet him up at I'll meet up with him at the airport there. Texas bench Quinn Ewers. I mean, it was probably just because the game was like over, right? Weren't they down like 20 points against Georgia? So maybe they just figured, let's see what Manning can do. Which one of them is playing in this game, I actually don't know. I mean, if you guys know, you can let me know. I mean, as far as how I handicap that, I'm not even sure it really matters which starting quarterback is in there for Texas. And then we'll talk about LSU, Texas A&M. LSU, I mean, they're coming off a game where I thought they were in kind of a bad spot, coming off not only a big win against a highly ranked Ole Miss team, but an Ole Miss team that's a pretty well-balanced team, and an Ole Miss team that had beaten LSU at had beaten LSU at Ole Miss last year, but it was a nice upset for Ole Miss last year, and they had come back from down 9 like late in the game. So LSU got a little bit of revenge there over Ole Miss. So I thought they were in kind of a bad spot coming out of that, having to go to only their second true road game of the entire season, but they were still able to beat Arkansas. And even though I thought they might be looking ahead to A&M and Alabama there, they still were able to destroy Arkansas for the most part. And I don't think it was misleading really either, even though, well, maybe it was a little bit misleading because Arkansas was -3 in turnovers as well, but LSU still dominated them on the stat sheet as well. So not totally misleading there. Now we have LSU going on a second straight road game though. And they do have Alabama up next, although they have a bye actually next and then Alabama. So is LSU going to actually look ahead to Alabama when they're going to College Station here, and it is a ranked Texas A&M team they're going to have to face? I don't know. I mean, I think they will probably have focus against Texas A&M because A&M is up actually atop the conference right now. They're 4-0 and LSU's 3-0. So LSU probably is still going to bring focus in this one. Texas A&M, I mean, they haven't faced the most difficult schedule, really. They crushed Missouri, and I said I think Missouri is a little bit overrated there. I mean, they lost to Notre Dame at the beginning of the season. Notre Dame is pretty good. And after that Missouri game, they didn't play well against Mississippi State, but that was a sandwich spot. I pointed it out last week. I thought that was a bad spot for A&M going on the road there for only the second time, even though Mississippi State is by far the worst team in the SEC. They're pretty bad. I thought that between Missouri and LSU, that wasn't going to be a spot where A&M was really going to be that focused there. And I think I was right. They only won the game by 10 as a 20-something point favorite. So that might mean that Texas A&M might be bringing more focus into this game, though. I mean, LSU is coming into their house, so I think it is going to be focused on both sides in this one. Texas A&M is down from 3 to 2.5 with juice, but they have 74% of the cash and 66% of tickets on the other side on LSU. So the market is shaping up, kind of looking like a pros versus Joes type of scenario there, with LSU being the public side, but Texas A&M grabbing some of the money there. And it is one of those things where you have a lower-ranked team being the favorite there, with Texas A&M being 14 and LSU being ranked 8, but Texas A&M is the favorite. Of course, they are getting home field advantage, but that line on this game is basically telling you that Texas A&M isn't that much of the better team, or telling you that LSU, isn't that much of the better team over Texas A&M, and that it's actually really close. And I think the public perceives LSU to be the way better team. But the other thing about this is LSU, they have the better offense. They're a really good offensive team. Texas A&M has the better defense, though. I mean, this is a Mike Elko team here. Texas A&M has been playing pretty good defense. LSU, I don't even know if they know the meaning of the word defense, even though they haven't allowed that many points in their last couple of games. So their defense has played a bit better in the last couple of games, but I still don't think this LSU defense is very good at all. Michigan State, why not? Just because it is a battle here. This is a big rivalry game. Maybe not as big now because neither of these teams are actually even ranked now. Michigan State hasn't been ranked all year because they're kind of rebuilding, and Michigan has dropped out of the rankings, even though they are the returning champs. Obviously, they had complete turnover coming into this season. Michigan State's coming up a nice win, though, an upset win over Iowa. They've played 3 difficult games in a row against Ohio State, Oregon, and Iowa. So 3 difficult teams. They were able to upset Iowa. Iowa was coming up just destroying Washington, which was the game I was on. I won on Iowa in that one. So Iowa maybe took a bit of a step back, had a little bit of a letdown there. I kind of saw the case for the Michigan State side there in that game. So Michigan State coming off a decent win, but I think they're still going to be focused. I mean, they're going to the big house, and Michigan are the returning champs, and Michigan is their bigger brother, pretty typically in the state of Michigan in the sport of football, man. I mean, it's all Michigan. Michigan is the big guy in the state of Michigan. So Michigan State, the game tends to mean a little bit more to Michigan State than it does to Michigan. And for Michigan, they dropped out of the rankings with that last loss, man, and it was their third loss. So you could see that could potentially be like kind of a dream crusher type of thing from Michigan, man. I mean, they were the returning champs. I don't know if they really legitimately expected to win another championship here, but they still were a very highly ranked team expecting to make the playoffs and whatever. And with that third loss, they might be out of luck, man. I mean, losing to Texas wasn't going to kill them. Texas is really good. Losing on the road at Washington and then losing on the road at Illinois, I think they might be done after that. So you might see Michigan not show up fully focused here. And this is sandwiched in between ranked teams here where they do have number 1 Oregon up next. So if they're going to focus on a game on the remaining schedule, it is probably going to be that one. And Indiana, who's ranked up after that. Although Indiana lost their quarterback halfway through last week's game, Rourke. So he has a finger injury, and it seems like he is going to play this week anyway, but we'll see as far as Indiana is concerned. So I actually like the Michigan State side in this one slightly, and Michigan isn't laying a huge price here, even though it is at the Big House. They're down from 6 to 4 with 54% of the tickets and 54% of the cash on the other side of Michigan State. So that line, it looks quite easy to take Michigan there, man, doesn't it? With Michigan, I think has to be perceived as being the better team because they've been in the rankings like all season so far. Even though they've lost their last 2 games, I think public perception has still got to be, I mean, you see the public coming in a little bit on the Michigan side, but it's still got to be that Michigan is the better of these 2 teams. It just looks too easy with the odds now. I mean, obviously, I'd rather have the 6 than the 4, but now down to 4, the odds are basically telling you these teams are almost even, which just seems really, really wild to me. But I think, again, that's the odd. You can tell the odds makers are kind of indicating something to you in a lot of these cases. So I lean to Michigan State in that one. Live from Bohemian Grove. They don't have me set up to do that at the very least. Texas was down big against Washington. You mean in the playoffs last year? I don't know which game you mean, Nate. They played in the playoffs last year, and Washington obviously beat them and made the championship game. Yeah, Quinn Ewers, I mean, he's a sexy dude, man. We all have a crush on that guy. Yeah. Texas, they still have the shot at the national title this year. It's not over for Texas. Charles, yeah, if he used Nadeau, he wouldn't have a finger injury. That's right, obviously. I mean, anybody that uses Nadeau, I mean, you give yourself like basically steel skin by using Nadeau. It's all over if you use Nadeau. Let's get to my actual plays here that I have where I think I'm being selective and I'm looking at the market here because, again, I told you, I liked the BC side here, but the market looks like it's indicating against it. So for now, I haven't played that game. But I think the spot doesn't look good for Louisville. And if you missed that, I talked about that right at the top of the show. Maybe I'll talk about it again Friday morning or whatever when if I do a show from Florida. I don't know. But if not, you can go back and see my analysis on that one. Because I do lean that way. And then actually, I thought there was one other game that I almost had like a lean on, but then I didn't actually want to play the game. And I don't remember what it was now. Yeah, I forget what it was. I don't know if it was worth talking about anyway, though. But there was one other game where, oh, yeah, I will talk about it, actually. I did not talk about it, but screw it, I will. What am I up to? I'm 38 minutes. Yeah, this video's, it's not going to be an hour and a half or hour 45 minutes like it usually is for me. So, yeah, the game was the Kentucky-Auburn game. I lean to the Kentucky side. I'm just pointing it out. I mean, it is an SEC matchup that isn't really like, it's not one of the like lesser matchups on the board, really. But this is a game where I like the Kentucky side here. Auburn, even though I do think Auburn is not as bad as they look. I mean, they've had a lot of losses, but they've had a pretty difficult schedule, man. I mean, losing to Oklahoma, well, Oklahoma's not as good as we thought they were back then. And, of course, Auburn, I was on Auburn in that one, and Auburn should have won that game. I mean, that game was in hand for Auburn, and they completely threw the game away. They dominated that game. They lost to Georgia and Missouri. They played Missouri close last week. Auburn should have won that game too, man. So I think Auburn, they're not as bad as they look. Like that Oklahoma game, misleading result. They absolutely should have won that game. They had the game against Missouri, basically won and wound up losing that game too. So they probably should have won that game too. So they're a couple of plays away from being a 4-3 team instead of 2-5. So this Auburn team could be completely different if not for maybe like one play here and there. But now they're playing a third straight road game and having to go to Kentucky off of playing 3 ranked teams in a row as well. And that close call, the way that they blew this game against Missouri, I think it's just going to be difficult for them to get back up off the mat, man. I mean, they had the lead in the final minute of the game. They were winning at Missouri as only a 4.5-point underdog, though. So that was one of those like kind of trap lines last week. Missouri was only laying 4.5. Like, what gives? The odds makers telling you Auburn's actually not as bad as their record would indicate, and maybe Missouri's not as good as their record makes it look. And Auburn, either way you look at it, though, Auburn was winning on the road against a ranked team. For most of the game, they were winning, and they had the game in hand, man. I mean, they were losing 3-0 early, and then once they tied it at 3, they were not losing until the final minute of the game. Literally, they were winning the whole rest of the game. They were winning 17-3 fairly late in the third quarter, still winning in the fourth quarter, and then lost it right at the end on a touchdown. That's just a brutal way for them to lose that game. And they have Vandy up next, who is now the newly anointed, number 25, the newly anointed ranked Vandy team. And Kentucky's been playing so poorly the last few weeks that it's possible that Auburn just looks right past Kentucky. And Kentucky, they still have a good defense. Kentucky, man, they still play good defense, even though it doesn't look like it with that Florida result. But I don't know what that was. I was on Kentucky last week. I thought it was a spot to fade Florida after they almost pulled off the upset against Tennessee. But Kentucky, they did not have a bounce back, even though they had not played well against Vandy the game before that. I think maybe this could be a bounce back because Kentucky at this point, they know they're not going anywhere, so they really don't have anything to lose. And even though they have Tennessee up next, I think probably they're so embarrassed by how they played against Florida that I think they're probably going to want to refocus and show up here just because you don't want to get embarrassed, man. Any way you look at it, and that is what happened in this game. I mean, yeah, like there's no other way to look at it. Texas basically completely dominated that game, and Kentucky lost the turnover battle too. So it was just all bad for Kentucky there. But I lean to the Kentucky side because they're in a bounce back spot, and Auburn, I think, could be in a pretty big hangover spot after what they did against Missouri. Kentucky's very public, though, at 82% of the tickets, 91% of the cash, though. So it does look like they have the cash discrepancy, but the line's gone down from 3 to 2.5, and it's just that line, man, there's just something about it I don't love because you're looking at an Auburn team that's winless in the SEC, and the odds makers are telling you Auburn's actually the better team because Kentucky's not even getting the full home field here. And it's like, really? Because this Kentucky team, like they almost beat, who did they almost beat? They almost beat Georgia earlier in the season, which was a big game for Kentucky because Georgia annihilated them and basically wrecked their season last year. So I don't know, but the line just makes it look kind of suspicious, man, with Kentucky having the better record over Auburn, and Auburn, like I said, having no wins in the SEC, but they're only a 2.5-point underdog, which indicates that Auburn is actually the better team. So weird suspect line there. You think I'm overthinking it, George? I mean, sometimes I do. I don't even know who Auburn's quarterback is, but Auburn, I mean, they've been almost beating these good teams even without a quarterback. Dirty Sock, what's up, man? I have not mentioned Liberty losing to Kennesaw State. That's wild, man. Kennesaw State, they stormed the field. I think it sets up a spot where you could fade Kennesaw State next week because that's game of the year type of stuff, man. 25-point underdogs. Kennesaw, worst team in FBS, basically hadn't won a game yet. They hadn't looked like they could even possibly win a game. Liberty also was the team that had the longest win streak in college football, I think, or at least in FBS football, and they ended that. Field storming, which you don't usually see. This isn't college basketball, so Kennesaw State maybe a go against in their next game, but they're probably going to be a big underdog again because they are not good. But yeah, Liberty, I mean, I think they overlooked Kennesaw State there. But I'm still shocked that happened, though. Like, I said that I thought the line was still like too high at 25, but I didn't think Liberty was going to lose the game. I thought they were still probably going to win by 10 to 15 points in that game. That can't be the guy's name. LeCarbetron Duke Marriott. Yeah, that guy. Not a good quarterback. Let's go to my plays here. I got 3 plays that I have right now. And the market, I believe, looks like it's agreeing with all of them, at least for the time being. The first one up is one of those kind of misleading lines, but I think I have market agreement on this one, and I think the situation sets up for it, and that is laying the points with Tulane. I know this is very strange for me. This is very untold. Like, I'm laying 3 favorites in college football this week for my 3 plays. They're all favorites. I usually don't do it, but this is what it sets up this way for me, man. Tulane, they're laying points against North Texas. They're up from 7.5 to 7.5 with juice. 91% of the cash on Tulane. 62% of the tickets on the other side of North Texas. And looking at this game, man, I mean, you take a look at this matchup. This is a noontime Eastern game, by the way, so this one's going to kick off right away. And you're looking at 2 teams that are 5-2, even though North Texas does have 1 conference loss so far in whatever the hell conference this is. I don't even know what conference they're in now, the American Athletic. But this looks like probably should be a pretty close matchup, right? 2 5-2 teams. But the odds makers are saying, well, hang on a minute. Tulane, although ESPN Bet actually says it opened 9.5 and went down to 8. I don't know when it was 9.5. I trust the pregame numbers a little bit more. I trust this odds screen more. And I see a cash disparity on the Tulane side with the line moving in their direction. And based on the situation, I like it. So all the checks that I do are kind of the boxes are all being checked for me on this one. And the fact that the line is just suspect, as I was getting to. Like, how could you have 2 5-2 teams but have the road team be more than a touchdown favorite? Basically indicating that Tulane's actually like 10 points better than North Texas is. Like, really? What? So I think that's going to cause the public to like basically think that there's value on the North Texas side. Wait a minute. North Texas, the team that has the same record basically at home, is getting more than a touchdown. Like, give it to me, right? Well, no, not so fast. Like I said, because North Texas, I mean, first of all, look at who they face. They face an easier schedule than Tulane, as I've showed you in a minute. Their games that they actually had like step-up games, like the best teams that they faced were at Texas Tech, and they got absolutely destroyed and gave up 66 points. Texas Tech's a good offense, but still, that was... I mean, if you give up 66 to anybody, that's pretty embarrassing. And these wins, I mean, South Alabama, Stephen F. Austin, who's an FCS team, Wyoming, terrible team. Tulsa, not good. FAU, barely getting by them. Maybe they were looking ahead to Memphis there, but FAU, not very good either. Florida Atlantic. And then the next best team they faced besides Texas Tech was Memphis. I think Memphis is probably better, probably less good than Texas Tech, but those are their 2 best games. Granted, yes, they were both on the road. Those are their 2 best opponents, I mean, and they lost to both of them. And this Memphis game, this is what they're coming off of, too, and they stepped up for this game against Memphis, dude. North Texas, this is a high-scoring game, 52-44. North Texas was in this game. They showed up. They came to play. They were winning at the end of the first quarter. I mean, the game was close basically the whole way. North Texas retook the lead again in the fourth quarter. They were winning in the fourth quarter, and then they wound up not being able to quite get there and losing the game in the end. And they did outgain Memphis. So they did play very well in that game, put up a ton of offense in that game. But after a game like that, I think you're going to be gassed, man. I mean, they played really well in that game, and I think they were like a 10-point underdog probably. Yeah, 10.5. So Memphis is coming off a North Texas is coming off a close call on the road, almost upsetting Memphis. And Memphis also is the team that carries a lot of like weight around their name in this American Athletic Conference because they've been one of the better teams in that conference for a while. I mean, they're Memphis. So usually they're up near the top of this conference. That was a big step-up game, and North Texas just missed. And now they have to come home, play Tulane. I know Tulane is above them in the standings. Yeah, so I don't know that North Texas is definitely going to not be focused, but I think they're going to be gassed after that game against Memphis, man. It's going to be tough to get back up off the mat, and they do have a ranked Army team up in 2 weeks after a bye, and I think after a game like that against Memphis where you're going up and down the field, they might be looking forward to that bye. They might be getting tired out by the end of this Tulane game, man. And Tulane, on the other hand, I mean, they've faced some more difficult opponents. Their 2 losses are against Kansas State by 7 and on the road at Oklahoma by 15. I mean, pretty respectable losses there for Tulane, really. And then facing like Louisiana Lafayette is actually not that bad a team either. South Florida, maybe not great, but they housed South Florida, and they put up 71 against UAB. So this Tulane team is not a joke, man, but they're coming off probably their ugliest performance of the entire year, as they were a big favorite at home against Rice. 22.5-point favorite is what Tulane was against Rice, and they only won 24-10 in what looks like a really ugly, low-scoring game. They didn't play well. They actually got outgained by Rice, and Rice was -5 in turnovers, and Tulane still only won by 14. So I think Tulane was just not focused at all in that game. I think they just didn't even show up. So that's the type of game where Tulane, I think they know that they didn't play well at all in that game, and I think they're going to show up focused in the next game. They don't really have anything up next that's going to be anything. It's really going to draw their focus, I don't think, against Charlotte and Temple. North Texas is right behind them in the standings. Tulane probably still knows that they're the better of the two teams as well, but after not playing well against Rice there at all, I think they're going to step up for this one. And maybe they thought they were just going to easily beat Rice. They were coming off a 71-point performance, and they had this big game against North Texas up next. So I like Tulane minus the points there. It is above a touchdown, but, I mean, that is what you can get. It has not been lower than that. So we're going with the green wave of Tulane. The Key and Peele skit, I don't know which one. The Carpetron, Duke Marriott, is that from Key and Peele? I don't know. I don't know all their skits. I only know the most popular ones, basically. Yeah, it is an epic name, though. That could show up in Black or Whack on Tower Game. Sports, baby. What's up, Bibberty? The starting quarterback from NCAAF. Yeah, Lowett Defeat. Is that actually his name? It might be. I don't know. I don't follow NCAAF, but they're almost always one of the teams in that Celebration Bowl. I don't know who decides what teams are in the Celebration Bowl, but I think it's always teams that are out of like the SWAC and the MEAC or whatever. Like those, for whatever reason, those lowest conference teams, like the best teams in the worst two conferences in Division I, get into that Celebration Bowl, and they get a nationally televised game early in bowl season for whatever reason. Up next, I said it was all favorites, and it is. Minnesota -4. Man, I don't love laying points with Minnesota, a team that's not very good offensively, and they're certainly better defensively, but the market looks to be in agreement with this one too. I was on Maryland last week, and I'm fading them this week. I do that a lot, man, where I'll be on a team one week, and they'll be in a good spot that I think is good. They do well in that spot, and then I think it sets up a spot to fade them and go against them in a bad spot the next week. That's what I'm doing here. Minnesota's down from 5 to 4, so you get a little bit more value on them, even though it looks like they have 98% of the cash and 59% of the tickets. On the other side, taking Maryland, I mean, public probably looks at this and thinks, well, Maryland, what did they just do last week? They just upset USC, right? Which was a game I was on. I was on Maryland in that one, and I think that's why Maryland is in a letdown spot here. But they're going to look at that and think, hey, Maryland just beat USC, man. That's pretty good, right? And they're getting 4 points here against this Minnesota team who can't score, and they have almost the same record. Minnesota just one game ahead in conference and the same overall record. Public may come in like thinking there's value taking the points. Obviously, I don't think so. I mean, Maryland beat USC. I was on Maryland last week. That spot was awful for USC. I mean, USC, you know, because of my handicapping of it last week, USC had almost beaten Penn State at USC. That was the game that USC had in hand, basically, and they blew right near the end. And then USC had to travel all the way east across the entire country to play Maryland in an unfamiliar venue. I thought it was an awful spot for USC. And that is why I took Maryland. Maryland got there. Maryland covered, even though they were down 14 later in the game. They not only covered, they won outright because they did the new strategy thing where when you're down 2 scores, you go for the 2-point conversion on the first of those 2 touchdowns. So in case you get the ball back one more time, you're actually going for the win instead of the tie if you actually get the 2-point conversion. There are a lot of math guys that can tell you about that. It's something that coaches have only caught on to recently, but when you're down 14 and it looks like you're probably only going to be able to have 2 possessions left, the math actually says, and I think actually situationally and your mindset-wise, I think it actually makes sense as well to go for a 2-point conversion on the first of the 2 touchdowns. It works out that way. So you can see here USC looked like they were going to win the game most of the way and totally collapsed. Big win for Maryland, and Maryland did outplay them slightly. I think my handicap was still right on that one. So Maryland's coming off that's a huge win, man. They beat USC. Big win for this Maryland team that has a new quarterback this year. Tua's brother no longer there, and they just hadn't really been playing well. And I think that was their first Big Ten win as well. So that's a big win there as well. Now they have to go out on the road to Minnesota. Not the easiest place to play, having to go up to Minnesota. And I don't know what the weather is going to be like here. It's 58 and rainy. It's this time of year, man, going up to these northerly venues here. It seems like it's always in the 50s and rainy. So not that great weather conditions there for Maryland. So maybe they won't love that or be used to that either. In Maryland, they also have number 1 Oregon up next. Although granted, it is after a bye. They have a bye next and then they have Oregon. But still kind of looks like a sandwich here to me, man. Going to Minnesota, not the easiest place to play, and they're not very familiar with going to Minnesota. So Maryland, I mean, they moved over to the Big Ten from the from the ACC, and the SEC. They wish from the ACC. I don't know when that was that they made that move, but I've looked at this and they have not faced Minnesota very often. They actually haven't. I don't even think they faced Minnesota at all since 2021. In 2021, they went to Minnesota and they lost 34-16. With Tua's brother, a quarterback that time. So they didn't do well there. I mean, this doesn't matter that much because the teams are all way different now, but this Maryland team is not familiar with going to this venue. And then the time before that they went to Minnesota was in 2019, and they lost 52-10, although Minnesota was a good team that year, and it looks like Maryland was without their quarterback in that game. So, I mean, take from that what you will, but they still got absolutely slaughtered. So they have not beaten Minnesota since, I think, 2017 maybe, and it was a home game. At Minnesota, they've lost the last 2 times they played there in 2019 and 2022, and they lost by multiple scores in both of them. So their track record historically as a program is just not good facing Minnesota either. Minnesota, I mean, they are returning back home after going out to UCLA, that was the game I was on UCLA. I thought it was a bad spot for Minnesota there, and they didn't play particularly well, really. I mean, UCLA is not a good team, and Minnesota barely escaped in that game. I thought it was a bad spot for Minnesota because guess what? They went into that game. They themselves were off of beating USC. So they had just played USC, and I didn't think they were in a good spot there, and they had to go out to the Pacific Coast. They didn't play particularly well. I got frustrated with the fact that one pushed from me. I had UCLA +4 in that one. UCLA, not a good team. That was a bad spot for Minnesota. And I think Minnesota knows they barely got away with that one. They barely escaped, and now Minnesota actually has a bye. So they're actually coming out of a bye. And usually I don't like a team that went into a bye on 2 straight wins like that because it's like, well, what do you have to fix? But I think the fact that they played poorly against a bad UCLA team, I think they are going to have some things to fix. So I think they are going to be focused here. I think it is a much worse spot for Maryland. The rest spot is certainly worse as they had to play that really tough game themselves against USC this past week, and they pulled off the big upset. That's a big win of the season, almost like a storm the field type of thing there for Maryland. So I like Minnesota in that one, and that's where I'm going with that one. And then to finish this off, one more play here, another one where I'm laying favorite. Lowett defeat, he's the starter in NCAAF. East-West All-Star game for Key and Peele. All right, I don't think I'm familiar with that one. Baylor, -6.5 is the last one I'm going to. This one, I know that some value has been lost in this one. I think it's gone up from 4.5, or actually 4, I guess, to 6.5. But this thing is getting up towards 7, man. So it is continuing to go up. I think you got to get it at below a touchdown because between at least 4.5 and 6.5, it's all kind of dead numbers in there. So the line will move pretty quickly a lot of times through the 5 and 5.5 because those are meaningless numbers in football because the touchdown is what matters. 3, 4, and 7 are what matters. Baylor, I mean, they're a little bit public with 62% of the tickets, but 95% of the cash. So I think they're public, but the professional money seems to be in agreement with Baylor on this, and it's just moving that line up dramatically. This is against Oklahoma State, who I really don't think is that good. We get back to the schedule here. What did I just do? Oklahoma State, So Oklahoma State, I think they're in a bad spot, dude. They just went out to BYU, out to kind of an unfamiliar territory there, and that was that big primetime game. They had undefeated BYU on the ropes, man. Ranked, undefeated BYU. Oklahoma State was winning that game with a late score right near the end, and I was watching it right up here, and I said, holy crap, Oklahoma scored with a minute and a half left or something. I said, they left too much time on the clock, man. Oklahoma State's defense isn't that good. I knew BYU was going to march down the field and score and win the game on a touchdown. That is exactly what happened. Oklahoma State could have had that game as an almost 10-point underdog, I think a 9.5. point underdog, I believe is what they were in that game. They almost pulled off what would have been a pretty monumental upset just because BYU was undefeated and ranked, and they fell just short, and now they have to play a second straight road game and go to Waco. Oof. And just like Waco, I think this is going to be a disaster for Oklahoma State, man. I don't see any reason why Oklahoma State is going to play well in this game, man. I mean, they're coming off a huge step-up game, like the game that they probably put in the most effort this season, and they're just not a good team. They haven't beaten anybody impressive, man. I mean, they beat South Dakota State, an FCS team. But South Dakota State is actually a good FCS team, so okay, fine. I will give them that. South Dakota State's actually probably, if you put them in FBS, I think they'd actually probably be like a top 50 team. So actually, that's not that bad. The Arkansas win, as I keep pointing out, was extremely misleading. Arkansas completely dominated this game. I don't understand how the final score was what it was, with Oklahoma State winning in double overtime. Arkansas almost outgained them by 300 yards, but they were -2 in turnovers. So that game, very misleading result. Arkansas destroyed Oklahoma State statistically, and then Oklahoma State's only other win was against Tulsa. I mean, okay, I know Tulsa's a little brother to them, but still, Tulsa's terrible. Then Oklahoma State stepped up in class, yeah, for sure, but they lost every one of these games where they stepped up in class. Utah, Kansas State, West Virginia, BYU, Baylor, probably not really as good as any of those teams, but still. Oklahoma State has not shown me that they can beat any of these Big 12 teams or any of these teams that are actually good. And this is a tough spot. Like I said, second straight road game, coming off a huge performance where they had that game and it was just ripped away from them. Just a completely crushing loss there. Heartbreaking loss. Now having to go to Baylor. And this spread, I think, looks a little bit misleading as well, because you got two teams that are 3-4, even though I know Baylor does have one conference win and Oklahoma State does not. But two teams with the same record, and Baylor's laying almost a touchdown. That almost looks a little bit misleading as well. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, the books are telling you Baylor is actually the better of these two teams. Baylor, actually, I think, flying under the radar because they haven't really been a good football program for a little while now. But their losses, I mean, they've lost to some pretty good teams as well. I mean, they lost to that same BYU team. I mean, no shame in that. They lost to Utah back when Utah had Cam Rising for most of that game, and then he got hurt towards the end of that game. Again, I'm not going to scoff at that. I mean, Utah was a good team at that point, playing well. Colorado, I don't want to admit it, but they're probably better than what we thought they were. So going on the road there, too, to high elevation, to a place you don't usually play, that's not that easy. And then Iowa State, I mean, that Iowa State team is good, man. They have a pretty good defense there as well. So Baylor, I mean, those games, I mean, they don't look that bad. And then Baylor, this win in their most recent game against Texas Tech is actually more impressive than any of Oklahoma State's wins, to be honest. This Texas Tech team is pretty good. They're really good offensively. And Baylor went on the road for a second straight week after facing Iowa State, and they were able to beat Texas Tech. So that was a good win for Baylor, man. Not bad at all. And I don't think it was misleading or anything like that. Yeah, Baylor outgained them. So Baylor did outplay them for the most part in that game, too. So a nice win for Baylor. And that also, like, breaks their loss streak, and it gets that monkey off their back because now they finally got a win in conference. So I think that can propel them forward, and it's going to propel them forward with confidence. That's like one of those confidence starting wins, man. When you break a loss streak, you finally get a win in conference, and you're up against an Oklahoma State team who's in a way worse spot. So Baylor is the play in that one, and that's going to do it, man. Thanks for hanging out. I don't know if I'm going to do it or not, but I may be right back with the NFL video and hope that it's quick. This one was only an hour, which isn't too bad. I usually go longer. I'm being more efficient this time. Once again, my plays, college football, Tulane -7.5, Minnesota -4, and Baylor -6.5. Got to get that one at below the touchdown, man, if you want to do it. I know I'm laying 3 favorites, very unlike me, but I like the spots. I like the way the market has set up for it. That's what I'm doing. Leonardo, she's so much taller than I am. I won't even be able to kiss her, man. There's too much of a height disparity. Thank you, George. Matt, go fuck yourself, obviously. That's going to do it for me, man. Thanks all of you for hanging out, except for Matt, obviously. I'm Tower Gang Toad, of course. I may be right back with the NFL show, which I think if I do that, it's not going to be a particularly long show. I'll try to keep it to like half hour, 40 minutes. Maybe I'll be right back with that. I already have given out one NFL play already, which is on the Rams tomorrow night. I like the Rams +3. I don't know if you can get the straight up +3 anymore, though. It looked like it was disappearing from the board. I don't know, but I'm Tower Gang Toad. Follow the Tower Gang Podcast, the most hilarious podcast that you'll ever find. Patreon.com/Tower Gang to give us some support. Live pre-show, post-show, extra content. We're going to be at Bohemian Grove a couple days from now. I'm flying out tomorrow. Tower Gang is live, episode 200. We did not do an episode tonight. We're doing 200 live Saturday. We may do maybe one bonus show from Top Lobster's house and live from the Joke Joint in, Summerfield, Florida? I forget what the name of the town is. Somewhere in Central Florida. Get your tickets if you still want to go and if you're able to go. If you're in the area. Tower Game will be live Saturday night. And that's going to do it, man. I'm Toad. And also follow flapper.net, FLAPPR.net. I am running the betting odds for their Milkers of the Year award because they love to talk about beautiful women in addition to sports, politics, humor. They do like an NFL weekly blog where they run down every NFL game. And I find it to be pretty funny. They're funny guys are there, so go check that out. They're shit posters as well. Have a good one, man. Peace out. Let's get some college football wins on Saturday. Peace.